Yeah.
Good evening, sir. Thank you for being here. So, on behalf of the Indian Psychiatric Society West Zone Child Psychiatry Subcommittee, thank you, Dr. Malay, sir, for being here and taking up this topic, which we all thought was a very much needed topic. I think we're all dealing with autism much more now. And as we're seeing younger children, we're also seeing a lot of older adolescents or young adults now coming for a possibility of a diagnosis or for social skills training, etc. So we thought that we should do this topic as to autism across the lifespan and how autism manifests at different age groups. And we thought you would be the best speaker for this. So good evening, everyone. Here we have Dr. Malay sir. I will just do a quick introduction of Malay sir without wasting much time. But Dr. Malay sir, I think obviously all of us know him. He needs no introduction. I know when I first met Malay sir, I think the one thing that everybody told me was he's the encyclopedia of psychiatry in Bombay. That's the name given. And truly, that's what he is. Spent many years as a PG teacher. He's been the honorary president of Bombay Psychiatric Society in 2016-17. We all know that he is highly interested in neuroscience, genetics, and in child psychiatry, having worked in our hospital for a lot of years. I think a lot of us who aspire and who are wanting to be child psychiatrists depend on Malay sir when we have any doubt, etc. So definitely, I'm sure over the next 40 minutes, sir will take us through autism across the lifespan. So welcome all of you to this evening of a lot of learning from Dr. Malay. And sir, I hand over to you and you can just help us all. Thank you.
Uh, Good evening, everyone, and thank you, IPS West Zone, for inviting me to talk on autism and how it manifests across the lifespan of an individual. And thank you, Manjari, for the kind words. Um, there are two aspects to this topic today. One is, of course, autism as what happens across the lifespan, and also some things about what autism has, how the concept of autism has evolved and what we are doing and uh, uh, what we are seeing and what probably will happen. So it's kind of autism across my lifespan, also as a doctor, as a psychiatrist, as uh, a PG student, and then now for after so many years in practice. I'll share my screen. Right. Am I audible and my presentation is visible?
Yes, sir, we can see your presentation and
Okay.
your audition.
So, Manjari, just maybe around 40 minutes, 35 minutes, just let me know. I might need to wind up so that I don't overshoot, right?
Sure, sir.
Okay. So, yes, uh, I'll present some kind of case vignettes that I have seen in my practice. All these cases are, very short versions of what I have seen and what I have managed over the years in my practice. This first case is a 2-year, 3-month-old boy belonging to an affluent class. At this age, he is fluent with the names of all the planets and some important stars in the universe. However, he exhibits poor eye-to-eye contact, seems to be happy only when the parents are around. Otherwise, he will not come close. He will not, of course, maintain eye contact. Now, apart from naming the planets and the stars of the universe and an occasional mummy and papa, doesn't speak clearly. Occasionally hyperactive, but otherwise no medical issues in terms of seizures or any other kind of developmental delay. So this boy, 2 years and 3 months old. The second case is a 6-year-old boy, very cranky, hyperactive, doesn't sit at one place, keeps on jumping around, keeps on blabbering, has got a certain type of stereotypical movements, maybe tics. I was not sure what was at that time, so I labeled it as stereotypes. Complex motor behaviors. He will have some jerk in the right shoulder, and then maybe he would touch his hair or something like that. He had food issues, extremely fussy about food. He would not eat any vegetables. It was only dal and chawal, and that too in a semi, almost in a liquid form, so that he doesn't have to chew. He would swallow directly. Would not socialize with other children. He would shout and scream without reason, had hand flapping. He didn't have a proper grip over his spoon. I was very, very messy. He was not able to indicate for toilet. He has to be bathed by the mother, doesn't answer to his class teacher, and he had one episode of seizure about 2 years back when he was around 4, but that was a febrile convulsion. When the parents came to me, they had all kinds of theories and hypotheses regarding what the diagnosis is and what needs to be done and so on and so forth, which happens more often than not nowadays, at least in a city like Mumbai. And I mean, especially now, since we have got all models of AI, people just need to put in what they're experiencing or what their child is experiencing, and they probably get detailed diagnosis and what needs to be done and where the doctor will go wrong and so on and so forth. But this was the case. Second case was some years back when the AI had not actually kind of caused problems. Only Google was there to create problems for us. This third case is a 13-year-old girl, academically very good, goes to a normal school, finishes at the top of the class in academics. But again, she is a loner, has hardly any friends. She is started menstruating about a year back. Well, she has to be kind of told each time. The mother has to take care, remind her, send her a message on phone when she is menstruating about what is happening, what needs to be done. And off late, she has been inappropriate touching herself. Most of the time, it happens in a room in privacy, but well, it has happened in social occasions also when there were guests at home and a couple of times in school. And at that time, she was, kind of made a lot of fun of, and she was called names. She has sleep issues. She loves to remain awake at night late, though she has a morning school, so she sleeps for about 4 hours. Then she comes home, has lunch in the late afternoon, sleeps for a while, and so on. But no medical issues otherwise. Fourth case is a 16-year-old male, very aggressive, inappropriately touches his mother, cannot indicate toilet still, can handle small amount of money, uh, has seizure disorder since childhood, and is completely non-verbal. Now, these four cases. So, first one was a child who is around 2 years and some months. The second child, 6 years. The girl, 13 years, and this boy, 16 or 17. A variety of presentations, but the common thing is what we would diagnose at the first contact without much of a hassle is two things. One is socialization behaviors or socialization motive, which is below the normal for age or below the norm for age. Language issues. So basically, yes, we would put these children in the autism spectrum disorder group. There is no autism, there is an autism spectrum disorder. And also, autism spectrum disorder is not one disorder, as we will see as we move on. So, these are some typical presentations which I have seen, and I thought it's best to start from here. Now, what has also happened in terms of the lifespan of illnesses, I mean, of the understanding of how this illness happens and what happens is, well, where do we slot it? How do we understand it? And it's also been a long history since the late 19th, 18th century. But the proper understanding of autism or autism spectrum disorders as a specific cluster of symptoms was around 1940s with Leo Kanner trying to explain to us this kind of odd behaviors, this kind of isolationist type of behaviors, poor effective contact, and so on. And around the same time, we had Dr. Hans Asperger with his concept of autistic psychopathy. But descriptions are not enough because if we want to treat some disorder well or any disorder well, we need to understand what is happening. And that kind of happened only later in the 20th century when we had certain means of looking at the genetics or the studies which were associated with the understanding of genetic factors, that is, the twin studies and so on, adoption studies, and then tools that were available to understand specific genes, their effect on what happens, and so on and so forth. So, right from 1940s, over the next 50 or 60 years, or let's say the first 30 years, 40 years was only descriptions. Description of this can be autism or that can be autism, and some kind of treatments based on that. So we had all these ABA programs, LOAS in 1964. We had the TEACH program 1960s, in the late 60s, early 70s. DSM did its fair bit of trying to classify it as a disorder, but then we had the theory of mind deficits and so on and so forth. So from 1940 to let's say 1985, 86, when initial non-specific, this is EEG abnormalities related to immaturity and so on and so forth, started being understood better. And then over the years, let's say the beginning of the 21st century, we had a lot of these large-scale genetic studies, genome-wise association studies. This breakthrough, the association of MECP2 with Rett's disorder, which was a specific etiological factor for a certain type of autism spectrum disorder seen in girls, that was understood well. And then, it has been more or less something or the other, some little contribution. But yet, after 1940 till now, we have not made a solid headway into understanding what actually happens in the various aspects of the brain development in an autistic individual. But what do we know is interesting. There are lots of theories, there are lots of conspiracy theories regarding what can cause autism. And where do we stand? Where we have enough evidence to support a particular theory. So commonly, these factors, so this is population prevalence, means how common something is in a population, and this is the effect size or the odds ratio. Now, neonatal hypoxia is not very common, but if it happens, the effect size is very high. So it comes on the rarer side, but with a good enough effect size, and the evidence can be supportive for that. Whereas if we look at folate deficiency or maternal obesity or preterm birth, which are more common, they can have a small effect size. So what we should understand is that the more the effect size, the more a particular factor is associated with something like autism spectrum disorders. Commonly, an older sibling with ASD has the highest effect size. So now, where do these things become important? They become important when there is an autistic child already in the family and now they want to go for a second child. Very high effect size, and that can be common also. We all know that maternal age more than 40, paternal age more than 50 are relatively common, but the effect size is low and not very predictive of only autism spectrum disorders. There could be other disorders that could be associated with something like this. Inconclusively, prenatal exposure to pesticides, history of family history of autoimmune disorders, summer birth. This has not really stood the test of time, and studies after studies have not kind of told us that this is really strongly associated. But what is definitely not associated is vaccination, prolonged labor, assisted reproductive technologies, IVF, and so on, assisted vaginal delivery, cesarean section, hypertension. This can be non-specific for many things, but not for ASD. So this thing we need to keep on telling our parents when they come that this is not associated. But right now, in the US and all, there is a trend of going backward in time, poor vaccination, and the rise of all those disorders which were probably prevented by vaccination. Developmental disorders like autism spectrum disorders are highly heritable, 40 to 90%. And why? Because there are many single single nucleotide polymorphisms or copy number variants which can be associated. And there can be de novo mutations also, relatively greater among a range of early onset disorders. So again, it is non-specific, and there can be a surprising degree of overlap. I'll show that to you. Now, in this whole gamut of things, there can be 20 up to 20% of people with autism spectrum disorders who can have single nucleotide polymorphism or CNV, which may be on the rarer side, or it can be a new mutation. Otherwise, most people will have a mixture of things. Now, these risk genes, they are not one-shot effective. They unfold over a period of time in a defined manner across development. Now, this development also is not something which starts at after birth and ends at 2 years of age. It is a lifelong pattern with different things happening at different times and different goals achieved at different points in life. Under sexual dimorphism, and that is why we see more males than females. So boys will always have a more higher risk than girls. most of the proteins that are encoded by autism risk genes have an effect on synaptic structure and function or chromatin modification and regulation of gene expression. So they can have an effect on structure and function at a very basic neurological level, or a back effect on chromatin modification and regulation gene expression that could be something like a epigenetic effect. But what gets affected in terms of the cellular population is the glutamatergic neurons during cortical development at a mid-fetal point in time. So that would be probably around the beginning of the second trimester. So the glutamatergic neurons, specific glutamatergic neurons during cortical development, right? This in the cortex and striatum and other areas seem to be the target of something going wrong genetically at a very early point in time. Now, we will not, this is just to show you that these are so many genes, this slide and this one. Okay, so right from chromosome 1 to chromosome X, there are so many genes that have been identified as candidate genes from whole genome or whole exome studies. This presentation is there, so anybody who is interested in finding out what a particular gene does, they can have a look at it. That, let's say, for example, we have this where is it? Okay, let's take any example. So let's say we have this DNMT. This is dimethyl DNA methyl transferase. So this will have a certain effect, right? So plenty of genes, and this is an incomplete list because there will be, we will have a better tools available, and then we can probably have a better understanding. So no point in mugging up the list, right? Because this will keep on changing. But yes, there is no one specific chromosome involved, and there is no one specific gene on a specific chromosome involved, unlike specific syndromes. So plenty of genes associated. Whenever there is a specific, so what happens per se, if you look at autism spectrum disorder, we have got multiple genes. But if we look at syndromes, let's say we look at Rett-like syndrome, or we look where we look at tuberous sclerosis complex, two common things, then there are specific genes that bear the brunt, and this kind of drives the whole syndrome. But they will have specific features, like tuberous sclerosis will have those tubers and that typical epilepsy, retardation, and an autism like feature. So autistic features will be there in this in this disorder, with the whole load being borne by this gene, unlike the specific ones. Then we have the MECP2 in Rett syndrome, FMRI1 in Fragile X. But many of these genes also get associated, this copy number variants get associated with something, forget these two columns, but here, associated disorders, intellectual deficit, schizophrenia, bipolar, seizure disorders. So what are we trying to say, or what we should understand is this: multiple genes. If a specific gene has got a mutation in terms of a copy number variant or a single nucleotide polymorphism, then there is a syndrome, because that drives the whole thing. Multiple genes related to autism are also associated with many other things. Now, why it is important is that when we assess children right from early on, we may not be able to, kind of uh, pinpoint what is happening, because this require very specific tests and all. And when we see those genome scan reports and all, they're not very easy to kind of understand, or understand what it is pointing to. But one thing is certain, is that in most people there are going to be some or the other comorbidities which are apart from the autism spectrum presentation, and also multiple metabolic diseases right from childhood can also present like autism. So the genetic loading is there, the heritability is high, and that should always be kept in mind right from day one, because we need to rule out certain syndromes, which could be the genetic syndromes and these metabolic diseases. And over a period of time, because of the overlap with other psychiatric disorders, which we are familiar with as general psychiatrists, they will kind of unfold over time. Genetics, this is a complex diagram of what epigenetic changes can happen, but I'll just focus on two. One is this MECP2 that we talked about. This is basically something that has to do with stability of the DNA itself. It's a cell adhesion protein kind of a thing. Now, when there is a problem with MECP2, the DNA is unstable. So it produces abnormal proteins. FOXP1 is associated, it's a transcription factor. Its association with the development of language. So those neurons which are going to finally go and sit in a particular place in the developing brain, they do not function well if there is a FOXP1 problem. So the language issues and the speech development can get affected if something is going wrong here. But there are multiple ways and multiple epigenetic pathways which can lead to a final common presentation of ASD. As we move on, a lot of things are known apart from genetics and epigenetics. Is the role of protein kinase C, alpha type of isoenzymes in all these kinds of things like cell migration, proliferation, cell differentiation, cell adhesion. But again, not specific for ASD, but across the board for neurodevelopmental disorders. Abnormalities in lipid metabolism, both in the peripheral and the central nervous systems. So again, when something is going wrong here, critical embryogenesis, myelination, brain development, and everything gets affected. Insulin like growth factor 1, which is a growth factor, again, fetal neonatal development gets affected. So these are specific things, but ultimately what happens is that the synaptic function is going to be affected whole scale. Presynaptic neuron, postsynaptic neuron, these are the various genes that are written here and these are their functions. Very simply put, this is a simple synapse is under so much of control and so much can go wrong at any point in time. The sum total is how much of it goes wrong. If it is below a certain point, the synapse can carry on. There might not be a difficulty. But if many of these things are not working fine, then the synapse doesn't work well. And what is specific to the synapse? The excitation inhibition that happens at each synaptic level. So a glutamatergic neuron and a GABAergic neuron. And this interplay between these two, if it goes wrong, if a GABAergic neuron is not able to function well, it may not inhibit the glutamatergic neuron. And that leads to a lot of, or rather, abnormalities or improper functioning in all cellular circuits at all levels, cortical and subcortical. A couple of slides on development. This is how the normal development happens at different points in time, right? And so basically, the cells, the neurons, they develop from the neuroepithelium, and this development starts very early on, around 10 to 12 weeks. So, even before we are aware that a woman is pregnant and she is taking psychiatric medication for whatever anxiety, depression, psychosis, the neuronal development has started. The cells originate, the cells migrate to the surface, and then they finally go to their positions as in an adult brain. So it's not only the number of cells, it's how the cells move along the neural axis, how they go and sit in their final place, and how they connect with each other. So it's not only the numbers, it's not only how they migrate, but then it is also the rapid development of the nervous system till how it resembles in structure and function as the adult brain. Now, yes, so 10 to 20, around 10 weeks neurulation, even before that, neuronal proliferation. And roughly what we are interested in, neural migration. So that happens till about birth. Then the first 2 years or so, myelination. Synaptogenesis keeps on happening up to adolescence. Synaptogenesis and apoptosis. So synaptogenesis means new synapses keep on forming as a part of development, as a part of experience. And apoptosis happens at critical points in time, let's say early adolescence, when the useless synapses, now they are not being used. We have enough encoding of experience, and that is when they will get killed. So apoptosis. Parallel to that, what happens around birth? The first areas to develop are the somatosensory cortices, then language output, and then higher cognitive functions. This is the part. Now, if we look at development of this, speech starts developing around 2 years and moves on. Higher cognitive functions will develop into adulthood. So when there are issues that we mentioned, genetic issues, epigenetic issues, leading to all kinds of structural neuronal deficits, migrational neuronal deficits, organizational neuronal deficits, and so on, we can have a problem here. We can have a problem here, and we can have continuous problems here that can go into adulthood. So the point I'm trying to make is autism starts here somewhere. We see some signs and symptoms and diagnose here somewhere. By that time, everything is set in place. Things will keep on changing till adulthood. It doesn't stop here. It goes on and on. So when we are seeing somebody at different points, so that's why I gave you those 4 examples. We'll see a couple of examples more where things will keep on changing. And as this happens here, there is so much of, let's say, baggage that has happened from conception till now, that the presentations may not be autistic. The presentations may be something else. Lots of studies on what are the structural findings and number of things. Again, some of them are contradictory and all, but that's why I'm not getting into details, right? In different parts. So, social impairment associated with orbitofrontal cortex, fusiform gyrus, uh, posterior parietal cortex, and so on. Communication deficits with secondary motor area, cerebellum, pontine nuclei. Behaviors, again, more of midline. These are the areas that have been the focus of research. And lots of studies, depending on how refined our means are, we see this kind of pictures again and again, right? In very brief, first few months of life, brain volume appears normal. Brain volume appearing normal doesn't mean that the brain function is normal. Then there is a rapid growth, volume grows up to 2 to 4 years. Late adolescence, late childhood and adolescence, brain volume increases, but slowly. Increased volumes, left more than right, increases in hippocampal and temporal lobes, gray matter less and white matter more. Cerebellar decreases in adolescents and adults, and this is not just hard and fast, but this is something that has been observed time and again. In children, brain volume increases are primarily due to increased surface area rather than cortical thickness. White matter changes can occur amygdala and hippocampi, so those which deal with memory and experience, fear, right? These are also kind of associated with the changes. And cortical gyrification is increased in children, but decreases rapidly upon the development of adolescence. Now, these changes are seen. More studies over time, over years, will tell us maybe the same thing or different things. But what do this mean? This means that, again, if somebody asks me, let do an MRI scan for my child, what will I be able to pick up? Maybe nothing. Or maybe something like this, which may not be very clear cut, which may not explain the symptoms. But what is more important is not the structure, but the function. And that is where MRI, fMRI has come in. Language production and comprehension networks, emotion processing, facial emotion processing, social brain deficits, greater sensitivity to sensory information. This kind of changes have been seen in fMRI studies. We do not do fMRI studies in children. They are yet experimental. These are yet initial findings, but let's see. Then we have a magnetoelectrogram and EEG studies. That is where they see this GABA glutamate imbalance, that is excitation inhibition, long range functional connectivity, right? And basically a reduction in top down compared to bottom up. So the feedback mechanisms are impaired. So when something starts, it keeps going on, doesn't stop. That's why we have stereotypical behaviors, rigidity in thinking. This is what is now known. right? So network mechanisms, this is what we talked about. There are already sensory deficits, and this leads to behaviors that we see. This is when patients are brought to us with those typical case 1, 2, 3, and 4. Now, because of so much of overlap, there are n number of comorbidities which we need to focus on. Intellectual disability, language disorders, ADHD, many of these are childhood disorders. All these are typically seen in adulthood. So when will this be seen? They can be seen in older children, definitely in adolescents, and most common presentations in adulthood. So this first list of comorbidity is not that we do not rule out the second list, but this list is very common in children who are brought early to us. 2 years onwards, this is what we are going to see most commonly. This, as the child becomes older, as the child starts interacting more with the environment, as the child has more cognitive development, is when we are going to be able to see these things better. Again, I am saying these things are there even in early childhood, but they are not very easy to pick up. Now, this doesn't leave any psychiatric disorder untouched. Why? Two things. One is abnormal brain development. Second is the genetics of ASD is non-specific and has a great deal of overlap with psychiatric disorders, right? Even the personalities, schizoid, schizotypal, borderline PD, OCPD, all these things get associated, and this is where we need to, when somebody is brought to us who is in early adolescent, late adolescent, adult, is this is what they will present with. They are not going to present with the typical uh, social socialization deficits or language deficits, more or less. This is what they'll come to us, because if they've gone into adulthood and they're doing something, then the presentations are going to be different, and let's see how. So how do we look at autism? What do I do? Developmental markers, behavior markers, cognitive markers, body movements. These four things are important because the diagnosis is only two criteria: socialization and language, and behaviors which are repetitive or restricted, and that's about it. This is what is going to tell us how I am going to approach a patient from a therapeutic perspective. Screening is important, but the first presentation to any medical person or a medical doctor is a pediatrician who has to be aware of what is happening. And many times pediatricians give the advice, wait and watch. And people literally wait and watch for years. So early diagnosis is out, right? But when they are brought up to us, we should not waste much of time. Clinically, a diagnosis is okay. We can use anything to kind of score what is the rate of what is the severity presentation, and then move on. Do we need to do any genetics? Not necessary, unless there is a family history, unless the first child is autistic, or there is a syndrome which is kind of suspected. Otherwise, it is not going to give us much information. Treatments for ADHD, we have the standard methylphenidate, atomoxetine. We do not have guanfacine, but we have clonidine. Everything can be used, but the same kind of results are not going to be available when a child has got an overlap in such cases with ADHD. Only ADHD, no ASD, the outcomes are much better, the tolerability is much better. But when there's an overlap, everything goes for a toss. For agitation and irritability, risperidone and aripiprazole have the highest evidence, but then they have the typical side effects. Now, again, in this population, even in adults, if something like this is there, if you're using, they're going to be predisposed to more of side effects. Uh, we can use SSRIs for repetitive behaviors. Again, the same, there is nothing which is drastically different. Only thing is we need to look more for side effects. Uh, why do we treat autism medically? We are not going to be able to address the core symptoms. So this is not going to improve the socialization or the language, but the other things that get associated. We saw that whole list of comorbidities. So if there is a sleep issue, if there are behavior problems, if there is agitation, if there are repetitive behaviors, that can be addressed to an extent with the medications that we have. Clonidine also, and naltrexone also. The interesting thing about naltrexone is that there is an opioidergic involvement in terms of mood regulation and behavioral regulation in all of us. And this opioidergic activity is hampered. So when we need to block that excess activity, then we can use naltrexone. So many problematic behaviors that are not responding can do well with clonidine and with naltrexone. Other therapies have actually got very less evidence. So whether it is home-based programs, ABA-based, low to moderate, most of them, most of them. And then there are those other 10,000 things which patients, sometimes people come up with books and books of what they think they've found on the net, and this will work for my child and not. But all that is anecdotal. So this will not be our starting point. If they want, they can try, but that will be in addition to what I am suggesting. N number of things are there, including ketamine diet. There was an interest in oxytocin, vasopressin, but it is mixed results. It has not really kind of addressed the core symptoms of autism. We have this belovaptan, similar to tolvaptan, which we use for recurrent hyponatremia. But again, it is not. I mean, it has been tried in a group of people in a research setting, but not really for commercial or rather bedside or clinical use that we can have. Right now, we come to this case 5, and this is again one of my patients. So, what is the background that I have said? Two things. One is how we see patients till adolescence. Second, what is the basis of all these things? Third, how is the understanding of autism evolved over time? Whether we are moving from only symptoms and descriptions to something that is more robust, that has been the aim. So, this is the lifespan approach. I saw this young male, 27-year-old male, who had come only with anxiety and recurrent depressive episodes, which are short lasting. So it is not very severe. Some symptoms vary for a few days or a couple of weeks. He will not sleep well. He will feel low. He might be more irritable, might have negative thoughts, but never suicidal thoughts or suicidal behavior. Some irritability. Now, this individual was married. Since when he came to me, he was married since 3 or 4 years, didn't have a child. But since, let's say, since his teenage years, he had a close female friend. His wife knows about him, about the friend. They are friends. There was nothing beyond friendship. It was more like platonic because he will keep on asking her, this female friend, about advice regarding everything, including if he has had a fight with his wife, he will ask, why, what should I do, and things like that. And if she would not reply to him, then he will be very upset. The wife was okay, and this was the problem. He also understood, but he said that, you know, we have been friends. Now that lady is also married, she is settled. So two things. One is this recurrent anxiety, depression, and second is this. But this man by himself is extremely good at his work. He's in a high profile job, extremely good with numbers, hardworking. Whatever his colleagues would have achieved in, let's say, 5 years in the company, he has achieved in two, with 2 or 3 promotions. So he's that good. But he has been kind of not been able to understand why this thing keeps on happening. Why does he have to seek so much validation from somebody who is just a friend? His wife also tells him gives him the same advice as the friend, but then, well, this is it. So he had come to me with what is happening with me. So started looking at the anxiety, and that is where the whole thing, in not the first consultation, but the second one, then it became very clear that no, these things are at the surface. But what is happening is this inability to really socialize well, really make friends, build lasting relationships. His interest is only work. Now, that could be many things. That could be social anxiety involved. That could be something like an OCPD. But then when you interact with him, it is more like very limited expressivity. Uh, you can feel that, it is not that rapport which we have is not that good for somebody who is not that who doesn't have, I mean, who has I mean, when we see patients who are anxious or depressed, we have that kind of an empathy. That doesn't come. And that is where I started exploring the diagnosis of an adult autism spectrum disorder. Now, this person was also very, he reads a lot. He actually got the DSM-5. And then he said that I have this symptoms. I said, okay, give me examples and all that. And that is where it became clear that this whole picture was this being the superficial presentation, this being the behaviors, and something which is underlying, which has been going on and that has never been addressed. Never been addressed because he was very good in studies. So he got everything uh, going good for him, apart from the socialization aspects. That is how they present. So, why? So, because of the various etiological factors involved, there are going to be neurobiological differences in terms of everything and at different points in time. So, in childhood and adolescence and adulthood, these neurobiological differences can lead to intellectual differences, interactions with the environment that are atypical. There can be limited educational achievement if there's an ID factor involved, selective or restricted social experience. Now, all these things combined. Now, if you see here, even in a simple diagram, there is no one arrow going anywhere. So, I am seeing in this individual all these kinds of things. This might have been there, but well, I have to take his word for it if they were there or not there. But what is important is that there is a possibility that all these things are happening, might have happened, and they have been going on over time. So, when we look at presentations like this and they are not doing well, either they are recurrent or they are not responding very well to treatment, a few things that we automatically look at is whether our diagnosis is okay, whether what kind of comorbidities are there. We also look at, I mean, apart from medication compliance and things like that, whether there's an underlying premorbid personality. And underlying premorbid personality may not be a personality, but something like an ASD that has been going on all the time. For most people who look at only children and adolescents, so pediatricians, child and adolescent psychiatrists will probably look at something which is, let's say, till 18. And if you look at, this is 18 years, so 16 to 18. Now, if we draw a straight vertical line, most of the things that are happening are beyond 18. Children who are syndromic may not have a very long lifespan because of medical comorbidities and all. But with better medical facilities and services, what is happening is that people are living longer. We are understanding what is autism as a process. We are able to diagnose better. So sooner or later, at somewhere around here, those whom we have diagnosed as having ASD will be, well, now I have to have some job, adult transition planning, employment, education, healthcare, housing, going for higher education if they are good academically, right? And the parents are going to come and tell us, for most of our autistic children, what after us? What do we do? And that is where we are forced to think that whatever we have known about autism and whatever we have done in terms of medication or therapies for children, we need to now look at it differently because the challenges are different. Uh, these are these 10 central capabilities in autistic individuals that we need to focus on clinically, socially, whatever wise. One is basic life. Am I going to live normal or die prematurely? So if I am healthy, if I am not syndromic, if I have minimal comorbidity, life can be good. Bodily health. If we look at that first comorbidity slide, there are a lot of things which are gut issues, immune issues. They can keep going on in the background, and they can lead an individual to a multiple small episodes of some or the other illness. Body integrity, senses, emotions, practical reason. Now, these things we may not be able to understand in somebody who is very young. they might be experiencing something in their own way. We might also, when we were, children or adolescents, we might have experienced all these things. But for those who are able to, let's say those of us who have been, let's say, apparently normal, we might have been able to, as we became older, be able to word it, explain this to somebody else, or rather discuss amongst ourselves where these individuals are at a loss. Affiliation, play, control over one's environment. This is most important. Now, all these capabilities everybody has, but in an individual with an ASD where intellectual deficit is not there, these are challenges, and on each of these we need to work. There are kind of studies and all, but they are small studies, they are anecdotal studies. Somebody has done and somebody has done that, but this is a comprehensive assessment. So when somebody comes to us, maybe not in the first interview, or maybe not in the second consultation, but over a period of time, if that individual is able to talk to us, he might have communication deficits, but if he has speech and even in his or her simple words, this is what needs to be explored. Autism can go in the elderly also. So the first basic rule and the only rule in neurodevelopmental disorders is that one is born with it and one is going to die with it, and everything is going to happen in between. So ASD in the elderly, so this is going to be somebody who is 50 plus or 60 plus. What is going to happen? Nobody has paid much attention, so it's poorly recognized, not well understood. What happens to, how do we diagnose older patients? What happens with and without a previous diagnosis of ASD? So adulthood, what happens? Whatever those developmental issues have happened can now also happen, but with aging, the concept of neurodegeneration also comes in. So neurodevelopment, to start with, whatever was there, now I have to kind of go on with it, experience my life, and that might also lead to a earlier onset of neurodegeneration. So then that issue will come. So what are the ASD symptoms and manifestations in the older population? Everything is at the moment very fluid. People have kind of just started looking at this. People were not really comfortable looking beyond this, but now we are forced to look at it. We are living longer, we are diagnosing probably better, and that gives us the responsibility, and this is what we need to look at. So in the evolution, in the lifespan of an autistic individual, this is where we are comfortable. This is where our discomfort starts. And in the lifespan of the understanding of the concept of autism spectrum disorder, where we are. So we are looking at, these are stem cells, but these stem cells are not going to be used for therapy. That is not to be done, because that is not going to lead us anywhere. Wastage of resources. But this pluripotent stem cells, induced pluripotent stem cell derived neural progenitor cells. So we are going to have stem cells which are kind of going to develop into neurons, progenitor cells, and we can study this in knockout mice, right? We can kind of modify, those hundreds of genes that we looked at and see actually what happens. So this becomes important for us to understand the impact of each and every gene that we have studied. So there are many, many studies on induced pluripotent stem cell derived neuronal progenitor cells. We can also study stem cell derived neurons. So these are cells which are going to develop into neurons. These are developed neurons. So we can study an integrative function better. We can study astrocytes. We can study prefrontal cortical monolayer cultures. So we have these capabilities now. With CRISPR, we can do a lot of editing work. We can look at specific effects. We can edit certain genes. We can modify certain genes and see what happens. Then we have cerebral organoids. Now these things, all these tables that I am showing you, 1, 2, 3, 4, this is just about 10 or 15 years old. These are new things. Organoids are clusters of cells. They are kind of small brains or small brain structures, not single neurons, but accumulation. So we understand how a small network can work. So thank you, and I think I hope I have been able to give some information on what it actually means in terms of a lifespan approach. In fact, I might have seen somebody, an autistic individual, in my residency, and I might now see the same person who probably was 10 or 12 at that time and now 30 years down the line. So, a middle-aged individual. It's from the clinical perspective, it is exciting to know what has happened, but at the same time, it is daunting that our understanding of the disorder is actually at a symptom level. In terms of therapies that we are able to offer, we can modify some things, we can change some things, and many things that we still have got to understand in terms of comorbidities and how best to manage them. So thank you so much, and over to you, Manjari.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. It was really very nice. You took us right from the genetics to the clinical picture and from childhood to adulthood. On in an late evening on a weekday, also we had 40 plus attendance, which is quite good. I think there are some questions in the chat box. I'll take some of them, and then I also have a question. Is there any new term known as adult autism, that is newly diagnosed, or adult ADHD who has never been diagnosed?
So all these kinds of permutations and combinations are possible. Never been diagnosed. See, there are a lot of individuals who will come to us, and in fact, it is again a very common presentation. When I am seeing somebody whom I am diagnosing as ADHD child, typical 6 years, 7 years, and typical history of ADHD, and I ask everything that we'd ask, including family history, and then they will say no, there is no family history. He is the only person like this on mother's side, on father's side. And then, okay, first consultation is done. I might, ask them, okay, do this kind of tests or do this kind of assessments and come back to me and we'll discuss again. And when they're going out, one of the parent will come in and then tell us that, doctor, I was also very hyperactive as a child. My mom used to thrash me because I was irregular in my homework and all. But now that individual is the father of this child. He is around 35 and he has got a very successful business. He has got a huge social circle and he is doing fine. So, when are things recently diagnosed in adulthood? Probably they are there. It is very unlikely that something will come up de novo. There has to be some processes that have gone on and on to lead to a presentation like this, a phenotypical presentation like this. So, why was it not diagnosed? Why? Because in my time, special parents used to say, "पढ़ता नहीं है तो काम business में डाल दो." So they have done their own therapy. And fortunately, this individual didn't have that kind of intellectual deficit or that severe an ADHD which hampered with his or her growth. So undiagnosed. It's only when we sit and go into minute details with that parent, now that child thing is over, we know that, okay, this was undiagnosed. And most of the cases are going to be like that. Now, what we also need to understand is that what do we mean by family history? We mean by family history that something like this has been there in the family or some other disorder has been there in the family. But what is more important for us to ask is the traits of any illness, if they have been there, not even the personality, the traits. So, if we diagnose ADHD, inattention as a trait in the family members, if we ask that, we'll get pointers. Autism spectrum disorder, what can be the traits? Social anxiety can be a trait marker, right? We can also have aloofness as a trait marker, or people say that he or she is a reserved, I've been a reserved person. All those are pointers that subclinically something is going on or has been there. So to come to the point, very common. Undiagnosed things are very common that might present to us more like new diagnosis. Why new diagnosis? Because now we are forced to focus on it because it is causing some difficulty. So the last case that I told you, we are forced to look at it because he has been having this kind of a pattern on and on. When something is repeatedly happening, we have to look at it, and this is then now striking. So fresh diagnosis, okay, you can diagnose today, but it is happening or de novo in terms of the processes, that might not be the thing.
Sure, sir. Thank you. I think there are a couple of questions more. I'll take about two, three. Uh, Somebody has asked, sir, in patients who present to us in adulthood, what should be the therapeutic approach for autism per se, apart from addressing the other comorbidities?
Therapeutic approach will start with comorbidities. Therapeutic approach will start with comorbidities. As a rule, whatever presents, whatever is going on since childhood, ADHD, for example, ASD, whatever are those typical childhood or adolescent diagnoses, will get modified, will have different presentations compulsorily when we see them in adults. If they have not come to the notice of any doctor till adulthood, it would mean that whatever was there was not really, really problematic. People will come to us only when there is a difficulty beyond a certain level.
Mm.
So they will come to us with something. An adult, again, there are lots of such clinical examples where I have diagnosed adult ADHD. I would not say adult onset ADHD, but adult ADHD in people who were bipolar, in people who have got recurrent depression, in people who have very commonly addictions, substance use disorders, very common diagnosis. But once the first thing is addressed, what are you coming to me with? Okay, depression, anxiety, alcohol, ABCD, XYZ. Once that is clear, then we need to focus on this. Now, what would be the issues that an individual, an adult with ASD, then there are those other things, relationship issues, right? Uh, if not able to work, what is happening now? That how are we going to address that? Best ongoing something, see if we can medically intervene or if we can intervene with something else, because the other things will now be issues. They are not pressing symptoms, they'll be issues, and issues will be can be handled in multiple ways. Therapies, if you're able to engage the patient, some simple advices can work. But the most important thing is how we are addressing the comorbidities, because that has been the trouble. Get it out. If a functioning is average or above average functioning, we may not need to address anything because, well, he or she has lived a okay life till now.
Sure. Thank you, sir. Some compliments, sir. Thank you for the insightful session. Thank you for covering the whole topic. Two questions on, sir, your take on leucovorin in autism.
Uh, FDA has ruled out leucovorin as a specific treatment for autism, so it is out of the window. Leucovorin will help only when there are specific folate pathway deficiencies. Genetically, if we are able to diagnose and we are able to give, it will work. Most of the time, it is not going to work, and it is basically a costly form of folate without any additional benefit compared to the regular folate. Now, regular folate also is not, uh, you know, I mean, I don't give anybody folate unless there is some kind of a deficiency. It Nothing works like that. So, leucovorin not advisable unless genetically we are able to demonstrate that there is a specific deficiency in the folate pathway. Then it works. Otherwise, no.
Sir, as follow up, have you frat tests, sir? I've seen a lot of pediatricians recommending the frat test, and then those parents are asking us generally, should it be done? Of late, a lot of pediatricians have been advising them to get it done.
Let them do. So what will happen is this, that if a pediatrician is trying to identify a syndrome, please be my guest.
Hmm.
If you're finding something, treat that. But now whether that is going to bring about the change in this whole gamut of things, that is my question. And more often than not, it will not.
Sure. And last, somebody has asked if before 6 years of age, with both ASD and ADHD, which drug should we prefer since none are approved?
So if nothing is approved, it's your clinical judgment. We don't have to wait for approval or guidelines. Even with guidelines available, it is our clinical judgment as to what would be the best in a given setting. Guidelines are general, they are not patient specific. So it can also happen that I know, I mean, I have had so many cases where pediatricians have tried to give, this thing, aripiprazole, because, well, it's a atypical, but then it doesn't have those weight issues and metabolic issues, and if you give it in adolescent girls, it doesn't interfere with menstruation, and so basically no effect on serum prolactin and all. But the problem is that most of the time when you give only aripiprazole, it can lead to a lot of akathisia. And we have to remember that as a group of patients, ASD are very susceptible to side effects than people who are not ASD or who do not have a developmental disorder. So this can be really problematic because everything will worsen, including new symptoms like irritability or often aggressive behavior, because many children who have limited language development or who are not or who are completely non-verbal, they have no way of expressing apart from being aggressive. So now what I'm going to do, okay, this has not worked, now try something else. Good old risperidone, see what happens. So there is nothing like what should we prefer, since none are approved. Uh, we have limited options, that I agree. But in that limited options, we are free to try whatever we can give anything a shot. It depends on how um, severe the presenting complaints are.
Sure. Yes, sir. I think, yeah, we're 5 minutes down. Maybe one of the last, somebody has asked how to prescribe leucovorin, though you already spoke about it, but
I have
answer
not,
it. Then land us.
I have never in my practice prescribed glucovorin. So whenever people come to me with all kinds of this new things, new kind of supplements and this thing, I'm, just go back and see. There might be one study or something. So leucovorin is out. If at all, if I'm considering leucovorin, I'll start with folic acid, whatever is available, fol white. This is what I would start with.
Mm. Sure. Thank you so much, sir. On behalf of our Child Psychiatric Subcommittee of West Zone, I take this opportunity to thank you. It was a very insightful discussion, and I think we could have taken some more questions, but yeah, I'm sure everybody learned a lot from you, sir. Thank you very much, and thank you to the participants and the other members of my committee for joining it at this time.
Thank you.
Thank you
Good
so